As you see, it is very, very complicated, and it is still very complicated during the war. So, after this background, let's talk more about peace negotiations. The first peace plan was suggested by the Arab League. The Arab League Action Plan called for the cessation of violence, the withdrawal of military equipment, and the starting of a national dialogue. So we can call it as a pre-negotiation attempt instead of a complex official negotiation. While the Syrian government accepted the program, accepted the plan at the beginning, Bashar Assad didn't trust mediation of Arab League's General Secretary, Al-Arabi, claiming that the initiative was used as Saudi Arabia and Qatar's proxy effort. So, but in the end, the Arab League sent a monitoring mission group in Syria. The group observed whether the conditions of the agreement is applied to 166 civilians and military observers. However, the Arab League's official report itself states that the mission was ill-trained, had insufficient equipment, faced with the conflict of ideas among member states with regards to its mission. So it was unsuccessful. The second initiative was achieved by the UN responsibles, if you like. The United Nations also organized several events to establish a peace agreement in Syria. The first attempt was initiated by Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General. The negotiations were organized through the United Nations Security Council. In the end, Kofi Annan met with Bashar Assad, Kofi Annan met with opponent groups in Syria, Kofi Annan met with several other stakeholders of the conflict. He first aimed to guarantee ceasefire and humanitarian assistance for those who need help in Syria, to civilians, of course. Then he aimed to start a Syrian-led political process. It was his ultimate goal to achieve a successful resolution process. But in the end, he only achieved to declare a short-term ceasefire. His successor, Lakhdar Brahimi, followed a more consultative approach because he suggested that because of the ongoing violence, because of the high level of violence, he suggested that it is a right moment to resolve the conflict, to end the conflict, because all sides of the conflict believe that they cannot achieve their political goals through armed violence. But however, there are still numerous terrorist groups, numerous sub-state armed groups fighting against each other, fighting against the Syrian regime, fighting against ISIS in Syria. So it was again remained as an unsuccessful event. The Geneva conferences, again initiated by the UN, by Kofi Annan, but this time it was achieved something like a international organizations event, because the UK, US, and Russia brought together for the first time, and at the end they suggested to achieve a transitional government body. which means that they aim to set up a framework for settlement after the Syrian regime, after the Syrian civil war. After 4 rounds of meetings, all sides of the conflict they blamed each other because there was still an ongoing violence, and the level of violence was very high. And Geneva conferences in the end was unsuccessful, remained unsuccessful. When we look at Vienna peace talks, this was even more comprehensive because 20 countries joined the conference, including US, UK, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, China, France, and Germany. They suggested to initiate an official negotiation. So, just like Arab League peace plan, we can say that this is also a pre-negotiation attempt instead of official negotiations as it was declared. During the conference, Assad said that we don't negotiate with foreign terrorists. So immediately after this conference, the conflict was escalated between the Syrian regime and regime opponents. ASTANA talks was started through the intention of opposition parties, so intention of rebellion groups. But at the end, it was like this. But later on, Turkish, Russian, and Iranian presidents joined the conference, and Putin suggested a change in the Syrian regimes. So, and a ceasefire was immediately declared in northern Syria. And this is very important because 4 de-escalation zones was declared in order to survive civilians in Idlib, Ghouta, Homs, and Syrian border. 9 rounds of meetings were achieved. In the end, we can say that these meetings were the most comprehensive meetings. I prepared a table in order to summarize the findings. The Arab League peace plan was not a well-organized peace event due to the lack of support to the mission group. Another reason for the failure of this event was the mistrust of President Assad on the mission group and on the Arab League's peace plan itself because of Arab League's General Secretary. As Assad thought that the monitoring group was a proxy initiative of Saudi Arabia, he did not support for maintaining the activities of the group. Hence, the monitoring mission to keep the ceasefire in several different towns failed. So it was the ultimate goal of the mission group. International mediators deployed by the UN, namely Annan and Mistura, also did not bring about an outcome for the resolution of the conflict. The analysis shows that they only had de-escalated the conflict, but for a very short-term period. While the conflict rapidly deteriorated between 2012 and 2014 through the deadly attacks of the ISIS, YPG, and other terrorist groups, as well as the Syrian regime, the reluctance of regional and global powers to cooperate prevented political resolution. When we look at the Geneva conferences, they were organized as 4 series of events. The conference hosted the foreign ministers of the UK, Russia, and France, which means that high representatives were included in the conference, establishing a transitional government body with full executive powers was decided to solve the time's up, I guess. Just finishing. Sorry. Yeah. Establishing a transitional government body with full executive powers was decided to solve the government concerns. However, this remained as suggestion only. When we look at very quickly to the Vienna peace talks, it brought, as I said, 20 countries together. The talks were organized as pre-negotiation attempts of official negotiations between the Syrian government and the opposition. Therefore, at the end of each conference, the leaders of the 20 states called both sides to sit at the negotiating table. But the reluctance of major conflicting parties to resolve the conflict prevented a successful outcome. When we look at the ASTANA talks compared to the previous events, we can say that it is the most successful. It has been the most successful event. The conference was initially organized by opposition forces and aimed at bringing Assad and opponent parties to sit at the negotiating table. When the level of violence rapidly increased, the talks still maintained. But while the Syrian government declared that the opposition groups were either national or foreign terrorists, they aimed to make sure the end of Assad regime and to re-establish Syria. So last verse. Even though political resolution attempts were initiated by Western or Eastern countries, their reluctance to put pressure on the Syrian government prevented them from reaching a political resolution. In fact, while there was a consensus between the Western countries that Assad must leave, the Eastern countries aimed to keep Assad in charge, which would secure their control in the region. In addition, the proxy warfare in Syria also prevented a peace agreement, as each state supported different sub-state armed groups through financial, medical, and military support, as well as training. Thank you very much for listening. I better stop here. All right, shall we continue with second presentations? Murat Tınas and Ahmet DEMİRDEN. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aytaç Hoca. It was good to listen you, to see and to listen your evaluations on the peace talks and peace negotiations on Syria. And actually we have a similar, or let's say related presentation to your presentation, because we prepared our presentation on foreign terrorist fighters in Syria and in PKK and YPG. So let me share my PowerPoint first of all. It is working right now. You can see the slides now, I think. We prepared this presentation at Turkish National Police Academy, me, Murat Tınas, and my colleague Ahmet DEMİRDEN. And it was actually published in June 2020. And our presentation, our topic today, is a little bit extended version of this report, and you can download this report on our school's webpage, Academy's webpage. Let me present you the outline of this presentation, this paper. I'll present you the first two topics, actually, the definitions, foreigners in PKK and YPG, and FTFs, foreign terrorist fighters in PKK and YPG, from left-wing and right-wing extremist groups, especially from North America, and from Europe. And the next two points, challenges of these returnees, and the concluding remarks will be presented by my colleague Ahmet DEMİRDEN after me. Let me also, sorry, I forgot to start my clock. Yeah. Definitions. The issue of foreign fighters is hardly a new phenomena indeed. We discussed there are many discussions on this in the literature from many respects, from many aspects, because the inclusion of foreigners into civil conflicts has been one of the substantial features of many, if not most, armed conflicts in the history. However, in today's world, currently, these foreign fighters often associated with Muslim fighting in various conflict zones. However, in this presentation, as we highlighted in this presentation, transnational insurgency and militancy are indeed a much more older and much more global phenomena. And we are presenting one example of it, the foreign terrorist fighters in PKK in today's presentation. Although the foreign terrorist fighter or foreign fighters is a very much old phenomena, especially after the power vacuum in Iraq and Syria, this issue has become one of the highest, one of the priority agenda of international peace and security, international actors. Because as in 2014, as UN Security Council stated that, although it's a very old phenomena, the new wave of foreign terrorist fighters is beyond the realm of any country, civilization or religion. And it is a larger in terms of numbers. It is more global in terms of its geography. Because, for instance, in Daesh, we have foreigners from 154 countries. I mean, it's really global phenomena, and it is more diverse because in the past, foreign terrorist fighters are generally fighting males, but now we have children, we have women, and we have male at different ages. And it is more complex, therefore, and it presented more complex security challenges, and it became one of the major threats to international peace and security. It's a very important phenomenon. However, when we look to the literature in academic meaning, and also when we look to reports of, for instance, many states and international organizations, we see that the literature ignores many aspects of foreign terrorist fighters, and they are just concentrating on one side, one group, I mean, of the foreign terrorist fighter. So I think we need to define what foreign terrorist fighter is. It is just the fighters in Daesh, or is it something, a more broadened phenomenon? As a term, foreign fighter is much older. Foreign terrorist fighter is a more recent term. And in order to define this foreigners in civil conflicts, actually UN Security Council gives a definition. It's a little bit long, but let me read it in order to understand the components of it. Nationals who travel or attempt to travel to a state other than their states of residence of nationality, and other individuals who travel or attempt to travel from their territories to a state other than their states of residence or nationality for the purpose of perpetration, planning, or preparation of or participation in terrorist acts, or the providing or receiving of terrorist training, including connection with armed conflicts. Indeed, there are some phenomena that we have to discuss while defining foreign terrorist fighters. The first issue is foreign. The usage of foreign is too state-centric because we are living in a modern state system. I mean, it's international level. We define the concept according to the Western understanding of state and citizenship. Then we create foreigners. They might not be foreign after all. I mean, those, for instance, the relatives of the people in the Europe or North America. Identity matters. We cannot exclude identity matters. I mean, and the higher the number of common and shared identity markers, the higher the chances for individuals to decide to join a particular conflict involving certain community. Therefore, we think that the discussion on foreignness is very important. However, in the modern understanding, the foreignness is defined based on, let's say, the citizenship of a state. What is to be terrorist then? The second concept that we can discuss. I mean, the list of crimes, the terrorist acts, the list of crimes are generally specified in legal codes. And they are also, these legal national codes are generally in line with UN conventions. And they might be murder, kidnapping, hostage, and etc. I need to be a little bit fast. What is to be fighter? I mean, the argument that the foreign fighter can give just a contribution on the battlefield is a misperception. Fighter means fighters can play different roles. For instance, they can be supply activities. They can have roles in supply activities like doctors, activists, and recruiters for other conflicts. So fighter is not just the fighter in the first meaning of the word. And when we think these concepts, these discussions, I think we argue in this document, in this presentation, that the foreign terrorist fighter fits very well to the definition of foreign terrorist fighter fits very well to the definition of the foreigners in PKK and YPG, left-wing and right-wing extremist groups. I mean, I don't need to elaborate on the history of the Syrian conflict and the PKK's and YPG's role in Syria war. However, we know that it has an umbrella organization, Kurdish Communities Union, which is an umbrella organization, and PKK is having activities in Turkey. PYD has activities in Syria, and the others are in Iraq and in Iran. Although PKK's main target area has been more focused on Turkey's territory for decades, the ongoing civil war in Syria convulsed the region fundamentally, and terrorist organization has changed its priorities. And PYD, in the name of YPG and YPJ, recruited many individuals from Europe and North Africa. Especially after the 2013, the YPG had received international support at both state and private levels on the pretext of fighting in the Daesh, which was gaining territorial control at that time. The rise of the Daesh and its atrocities against civilians in Syria and Iraq have led some extremist groups from both far left and far right to join the YPG. Of course, another reason for this flow of foreign terrorist fighters is the glorification of YPG militancy in international media. Whatever the reasons, which are also important, when we look to the numbers, UN, confirms that as officially, and it is indeed much more numbers, but officially, United Nations confirms that more than 400 FTFs from Europe, America, and Australia, both male and female, have joined the Kurdish People's Protection Unit in Syria during these civil war years. It also, the United Nations also confirms that whatever their original intentions, fight against Daesh or whatever it is, their actions may account to criminal offenses. So indeed, they are very similar in terms in the definition, according to the definition of foreign terrorist fighters. And we see the left-wing extremist groups and right-wing extremist group within the ranks of PKK, YPG in Syria. When we look to the first group, it was the leftist groups. There are indeed there are many in PKK's ranks. Let's say the umbrella group is the International Freedom Battalion, but within that, let's say, group, there are many groups from left-wing organizations from Europe and in North America, including Antifa, which was very popular after, Trump's speech on Antifa. Regarding the second category of FTFs motivated by far-right extremism, there are plenty of groups operating in Syria. Some of these right-wing extremist groups are carrying out their activities on the side of Assad, and some of them are within the YPG or in alliance with YPG. And one of the most important group among these was the self-sacrificers. The Veysel is one of the most prominent ones. It is a Christian military organization established in 2014 to defend Christians and to fight against Daesh. These are the, let's say, the overall highlighting points that I need to present here, but I can continue with your questions after my presentation, because in order to, considering the time limits, I need to give the floor to my colleague Ahmet, Dr. Ahmet.
Hi there, my name is Ahmet DEMİRDEN, I'm with Turkish Police Academy. As a psychologist, I'm going to talk about the psychological aspect of foreign terrorist fighters and returnees. But before that, I need to, there you go, bring up my, okay. So you guys can see the screen, right?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So, like when we look at the foreign terrorist fighters in PKK, YPG, and returnees, like these people make a very consequential decision to join a civil war, not because of survival needs, like they didn't happen to be in the area and had to choose between sides. They actually made very risky travel arrangements, and they left their probably relatively safe homes and joined the fight.
Sorry, Mr. DEMİRDEN. Can you go to full screen, please? Full screen, F5. And I'm afraid you have 20 minutes remaining.
Okay.
Just a bit, yeah. Just a bit.
All right. Is it now full screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So these people, they joined the conflict zone, and their experience in the conflict zone, regardless of the side, whether they are with Daesh, PKK, or YPG, the fact that they received combat training, and the chances are they are involved in violent acts or they witnessed traumatic events, the risks they pose upon their return, their home country, should, like that risk assessments should involve a psychological framework. However, when we look at the, perhaps it's the reflecting the threat perception in the West, like within these group of people, there is a focus on a specific segment, Daesh, right? However, even like some other foreign terrorist fighters and returnees were being almost like honored to fight on behalf of humanity in conflict zones. So that created the narrative environment to attract so many people from different, ideology in the area. But when they, again, return back to their countries, the chances are there's no professional assistance. And their problem-solving skills in the conflict zone, very high likely that involves violence. Why is it important? Because in psychology, there are two very well-known established risk predictors for violent behavior. One is past violent acts, of course, and the second is the impairment of anger management skills. This is also related, for example, with a concept it's called moral injury. That's very well known when an individual is in an extreme and unprecedented violent life experience in a conflict zone, their moral standards change in relation to their own and others' motivation or capacity to act in a just and ethical manner. And there's one thing I need to highlight in this presentation is that there's this, misconception that some of or many of these foreign terrorist fighters or returnees or terrorists, for that matter, have some psychopathological issues. The fact that the research shows psychopathology is not more prevalent in this group of people than the normal population. So these people, like the terrorist groups, they need to create narrative to justify their violent acts. And they do it by way of, for example, moral disengagement, desensitization to violence, minimizing the consequences, or diffusing of personal responsibility, dehumanizing victims. Like when they argue that they fight against evil, Daesh, they have that what's called moral dominance over others, so they can justify their actions. On the other hand, when we look at, for example, the de-radicalization programs, the main objective is to create the moral engagement, humanizing others regardless of their group. That's the objective. That's important because unless these foreign terrorist fighters and returnees, regardless of which terror group or violent group they belong to, Daesh, PKK, or YPG, unless they revert back to socially accepted moral engagement perception, they're going to remain threat. Because as I said, in their mind, they have that moral dominance over others. So when they see, for example, a person in their country, they look like a Daesh member, they kind of justify their actions, their violent actions towards them. We've seen that in many parts of the West, these people participate in riots, looting businesses, inciting violence in protests. And we need to be careful about the creating narrative to facilitate their actions as well. listen, like these two groups, for example, rival groups, they feed from each other's animosity. For one group, Daesh is the evil. For other group, you know, Daesh is the jihadist. But when you use these terms, jihadist or whatever, you kind of facilitate their narratives to recruit, you know, supporters around the world, because their claim is they fight in the name of billions of Muslims. Like that's their so-called claim. And in order to do that, they need to create social identity. And when we look at the statements from foreign terrorist fighters, some of them, they say they've experienced the friendship, the social bond, the comradeship they've never seen before. But the social identity comes with social categorization, us versus others. And you know, inadvertently, or you know, who knows, perhaps many stakeholders get advantage of this animosity between violent groups. There are narratives in the media that creates or feeds that perception. Like two seemingly rival groups, for example, Daesh and PKK, they feed each other's animosity, and create that narrative to you know, reinforce the social bond amongst them. In conclusion, I know the time is very limited, and I don't want to take any longer of your precious time. In conclusion, I want to emphasize 2 points. When we talk about the risk analysis in the civil conflict zones, FTFs and returnees, partly to a certain extent, it's a matter of psychological research. And also it needs to be underlined that given all the FTFs and returnees, in one way, shape or form, they've received some combat training or experience, or they've experienced some trauma. And these groups from far right to far left, the Antifa, could actually be a member of the same group, and we've seen that in YPG and PKK case. And they justified their violent acts under the pretext of fighting Daesh. The risk involves all these people, not only Daesh, but all the other FTFs and returnees when they come back to their home countries. Thank you very much for the organizers and all the participants for organizing this conference, and that concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much, Murat and Ahmet DEMİRDEN. Now we have Selim ÖTERBÜLBÜL. Selim, floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. We are in the opening session, so I'd like to thank the organizers and wish all participants a conference without any kind of technical difficulties. This presentation is an analytical part of my PhD thesis in progress, so it has placed in the Syrian civil war session. It searches China's evolving role in the Syrian crisis, and due to the security concerns, it's the primary concern of this study. I'd like to start with a brief analysis of China's perception on the Middle East issues, and later on, in particular, to the Syrian crisis. I will analyze the motivations behind, and it will explain what has happened until this day and give us some hints about the future and the future of China's role in the crisis. It will search through economic, security, and normative aspects of the study. As we all know that China's Middle East policy is driven by economic orientation since the country became the major oil importer by the 1990s. That kind of relationship requires regional stability and reliable partners to maintain economic relations. But it all turned into upside down by the Arab uprisings. The realist school expects that China would adopt a military role in the end in the region due to securing its economic interests, but we can say that it is very limited. Some military base in Djibouti and Wada port in Pakistan, but the military presence is very limited, and there is no intention to do so in official narrative of Chinese statement. Yet Beijing kept its distance from security issues, which raised criticism about China's role in the region. Critics on China became a free rider of the security network that the United States established, financed, and sustained for all these years. In times of crisis, we can say that China prioritized diplomatic instruments, especially the peaceful resolution, peaceful settlement of disputes, the mediation or quasi-mediation efforts. We can see Chinese efforts on the ground, and it is rather different from the Western perception because Chinese mediation efforts prioritize respect to authority, collective good of the parties, and some social harmony instruments. In the Syrian crisis, we can see that since the beginning of this conflict, China has gained very little attention in terms of other great powers' role of the conflict or the regional actors' role in the conflict, because China has sustained a rather low profile since its policy based on the degree of Chinese investment and trade relations and energy relations with the regional countries. We can say that Yemen, Libya, and Syria, these three cases turned into a civil war. But when we compare these different cases, Syria became the least important one because China has a huge investment in Libya, in infrastructure business, and Libya was oil exported to China, nearly 5% of China's consumption. In Yemen, of course, the country has a very significant geographical place regarding trade routes and oil supply, and China invests a lot the oil industry of the country, but we cannot see such economic relations with Syria. There is no such Chinese investment in Syria. There is no such oil exportation relations with Syria, but the great power competition turned the Syrian crisis into the very significant issue. So we can say that there is no economic ground that we are used to in other conflicts. So China stands aloof from the military issues, but provide some tacit support for other parties, which is known as a wait-and-see policy of China. It provides a middle ground between opposition and the Assad regime. From the beginning of the conflict, China promotes mediation efforts and call for a ceasefire, call for a political solution between parties. Yet there are some difficulties because there is no a single united opposition ground that China would address and participate a mediation effort in between Assad and the opposition front. It later became much more problematic because it is nearly impossible to differentiate which opposition group is radical or which one is not, or who will represent this whole bunch of different ideological groups. So the economic session is different, but the normative aspect is much more significant because the backbone of China's position on the Syrian crisis based on that. It is not a new phenomena considering Zhou Enlai's 5 principles of peaceful coexistence from the 1950s and the Bandung conference participation of China and its argument. It is a much more stable position because we can say that there are 3 principles. First one is the respect to sovereignty. It is a key issue for China. The second one is territorial integrity of every country. It is an important reference in any ground, in United States, in bilateral relations, in any kind of armed conflict. And third one is non-interference to others' internal affairs. These 3 normative grounds shape China's perception on any armed conflict as well as the Syrian crisis. We can say that it is mostly referenced in the discussion of United Nations Security Council and those discussions on the draft resolutions in there. So Beijing plays the middle ground in between opposition and Assad, and this strengthened its arguments on staying silent. But this strengthened the pro-Assad involvement in the ground, because Beijing did not criticize Russia's involvement or Iranian involvement, because they have called for help by the Assad regime, which is a legitimate ruler of the country according to Chinese officials, and they were invited by the Assad regime. On the other hand, we cannot say that the same thing on the United States and other regional countries' involvement. China criticized all other involvement, starting from the United States and as well as the Turkey's operations in the northern Syria, even though Turkey has declared that it is not a problem for Syria's territorial integrity, but it is a normative ground for China, so they put the framework on that ground. It is silence considered as a pro-Assad stance, and it is absent votes in the United Nations Security Council mostly considered as a pro-Russian stance. But if you refer this normative ground, then you can understand China's position on some idealized principles. This principle ground would present sustainability from the beginning of the conflict, but I argue that there was an evolving pattern in China's perception, which is based on the security aspect of this conflict. What was evolved, China's role would be the security issues in the region. China might be indifferent until the security aspects also affect most of its domestic concerns. Those normative ground would also refer some of the China's domestic concerns. If we are talking about territorial integrity, respect to sovereignty, non-interference to others' domestic issues, you should keep in mind that China has a huge problem in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, in Tibet, in Taiwan is a very significant issue in its foreign policy. If you block others' critics on those issues, so you need to sustain your stance on different regional and international problems as well. And security aspects also demonstrate that kind of domestic and foreign policy linkage, because the rise of radicalism, it has been regarded as a serious problem in the domestic politics of China way before the Arab uprising. If you remember some terrorist attack during the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and the security aspect also affect the most concerned issues in domestic politics. It is highly related with the rise of radical and extremist groups, especially the rise of ISIS threat, because China feels insecure mostly regarding the other permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, since the leader of the ISIS directly threats the Chinese authorities. He called the Muslim minorities, especially the Uyghur minorities, to join the cause and join its struggle against all kinds of governments, and it is a direct confrontation with the Chinese authorities. The rise of radicalism has already become the issue of internal affairs, so the rise of ISIS threat shaped and put some kind of a framework on Chinese response to the Syrian crisis, and it sustained its thesis support in fight against ISIS. But we need to keep in mind that these are all based on this normative framework, the fight against ISIS, but you must stick to the territorial integrity and respect to sovereignty if we are talking about the Syrian mainland. So we can say that in in Syrian conflict, China calls for a political dialogue, political solution determined by the Syrian people. Political transition period would be possible. Of course, territorial integrity is very significant, and call for a humanitarian aid, reject any kind of armed involvement, expect the limits of the sovereign rights. China, in that regard, became a partner in counterweighting Western pressure on this Assad regime, and those actions of the Chinese regime, for example, sending diplomatic envoys, sending some major armed officials to the Assad regime around 2016, rejecting some draft resolution in the United Nations Security Council in the beginning of the conflict, around 2011 and 2012, is all counterweighting the Western pressure on the Assad regime. Even today, for example, those humanitarian aid is a very significant issue, and the latest UN resolution few months before, in July, if I'm not wrong about that, has passed. And China again also refer the counterweighting the Western pressure by saying that these sanctions on the Assad regime problematize the fight against COVID struggle, for example. So if I will conclude my remarks with the future of this role, we can say that the most important part for China in the Syria is building stability and peace, no matter what, no matter how they build that, but stability and peace in the region is the key aim. Second one, we can say that even though China has a very limited economic relations, it has kept its stance to protect foreign intervention in the Syrian crisis. We must keep in mind the bad experience in Libya and Chinese absentees in the Libya draft would shape its reactions in other crises as well. Its security concerns related to domestic affairs also significant in shaping its evolving role. It has placed itself a major player for the reconstruction of the country in the future. Of course, they promote Belt and Road Initiative and how it brings stability and prosperity and some kind of development, investment for any country that participates, but it is rather an exaggerated argument by the local authorities, because the great power competition creates an extraordinary conditions, and narrative of the local actors also exaggerate the potential of that kind of foreign investment and future prospects of those foreign major powers. But we can say that there is no that much significant diplomatic or economic investment of China in the Syrian crisis, yet it has placed some stable ground for security aspects and by the normative aspects that we can see China pursue in every armed conflict. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Selim ÖTERBÜLBÜL. Now we have Veysel presenting changing in Turkey-Syrian policy, limits of bandwagoning.
Hi everybody, I would like to thank Middle East Center for organizing this conference, and my colleagues shared their ideas on the sections. Firstly, I will make a correction about the headline of my presentation. Actually, the correct headline is changing in Turkey-Syrian policy, limits of bandwagoning for profit. I mean, I will not investigate I will investigate the limits of bandwagoning for profit strategy, not bandwagoning concept in a broader sense. In my presentation, I will try to explain what kind of strategy Turkey applied and what kind of drivers caused Turkey to follow this strategy. I assume that Turkey applied bandwagoning for profit strategy on the initial phase of Syrian crisis. I mean, I am not saying this, Turkey applied this strategy from the initial crisis until now, but I think from the beginning of the Syrian crisis until mid of 2013, Turkey applied this strategy. But once Turkey recognized this strategy does not work due to United States approach to Syria and become face-to-face and new threats, Turkey changed not only priorities for short time, but its strategy as well. Firstly, I will mention the alternative explanation and I will eliminate them. Then I will discuss the bandwagoning for strategy concept shortly, and then I will evaluate Turkey's Syrian strategy in highlighting of this concept. Dominant approach was focused on ideological aspect of Turkey's decision makers and claimed that Turkey had Islamist agenda in terms of applying a strategy towards Arab Spring and specifically to Syrian crisis. According to this approach, Turkey's decision makers' Islamic identities was the main driver for them to see the Islamist movements gaining a moment in the region. The other approach considered Turkey totally passive and the others totally engaged without considering other players in Syria. But I consider Turkey's Syrian strategy in realistic approach, and my point is that Turkey engaged to Syrian crisis from very beginning with bandwagoning in order to profit from potential change, but this strategy did not work because, as I said, United States and other players changed their approach to Syrian crisis. Bandwagoning and balancing are two main strategies that define states in alliance choices in order to provide security or balancing the current or potential threats. Both terms are used for state behavior in terms of grand strategy and for state response to a new conflict or cooperation. Schweller revisited bandwagoning concept and claims that states do not bandwagoning only to provide security or balancing the threats, but they can make bandwagoning to another power for profit. I mean, Schweller considered the bandwagoning like as investment for near future and to make a profit to benefit from this strategy in near future. Balance of threat theory's definition of bandwagoning is aligning with source of danger or giving into threats. I mean, a state made a bandwagoning to another power because it's perceived a threat from this power and try to eliminate this threat by make a bandwagoning. And Waltz uses bandwagoning to serve as the opposite of balancing. Bandwagoning refers to joining the stronger coalition. Balancing means allying with the weaker side. As we see, the bandwagoning and balancing are opposite terms to define a state's behavior in allying choices. Walt redefines these terms to suit balance of threat theory and put the threat terms to center of this approach. And he said, when confronted by a significant external threat, states may either balance or bandwagon. Balancing is defined as allying with others against the prevailing threat. Bandwagoning refers to alignment with source of the danger. By these definitions, Walt and like Waltz before him intends to place the concept of balancing and wagoning in polar opposition. But according to Schweller, the central premise of balance of threat theory stacks the deck in favor of disproportionately finding balancing over bandwagoning behavior. And it's a balancing much more common much common behavior state more than bandwagoning. Balance of threat theory is designed to consider only cases in which the goal of alignment is security, and so it systematically excludes alliances driven by profit. However, states can make bandwagoning too stronger, not only to provide security or eliminate the threats, but they can do it for profit. Moreover, bandwagoning is not a capitulation, does not give the initiative to the stronger actor. When profit rather than security drives alliances' choices, there is no reason to expect that states will be threatened or casual to climb aboard the bandwagon. They do so willingly, not because of the coercive, the other power. The bandwagon gains momentum through the promise of rewards, not threats of punishment. Thus, we will not observe cases of bandwagoning for profit by examining alliances as a response of threats. We must look instead at alliance choices made in expectation of gain, unfettered by a desire for greater security. And for me, from this point of view, bandwagoning for profit concept in terms of chivalry usage is very useful to define Turkey's initial strategy towards Syrian crisis. And I claim that Turkey followed other powers, specifically United States in Syrian crisis, in order to profit the new circumstances. To be more concrete, I think Turkey's decision makers calculate that United States and other European allies will evolve to Syrian crisis, and Turkey wanted to be a part of this process to provide some benefits. When the uprising started in Syria, as we know, Turkey's approach was very cautious but not passive. On the first 6 months, Turkey tried to seem not offensive. Nonetheless, Turkey continued to negotiate not only with Assad regime but also with opposition. Since August 2011, Turkey declared that Assad is not a peaceful actor and transformation is required in Syria, and shared the idea that Assad must go. And as we know, actually, this phrase was used by Obama administration on August 2011. But the question here is that although Turkey have a good relations with Syria, with Assad administration, and did not perceive any threat from Syrian administration, from Assad administration, why Turkey turned against the regime? And my answer is that Turkey calculated that international community and United States and the other allies of United States will intervene by means of military and diplomatic instruments in order to topple the Assad regime. By other words, I claim that Turkey calculates Assad regime will be toppled and Turkey should benefit from the new regional order. Mainly, Turkey made an investment for near future, dependent on the international community and the United States and its other allies who problematized and questioned Syrian regime and declared that it must go. From this point of view, Turkey can be considered actually a revisionist power, at least expected United States to change the regional status quo via regime change. Main reason or main driver of Turkey's calculation was decision of NATO to involve to Libya and Obama's discourse to topple Assad regime. And I think that it was a sign, or Turkey perceived NATO involvement to Libya and toppling Gaddafi regime, perceived this situation as a sign to be happened in Syria as well. And as we know, Obama administration did not conduct a military operation against Assad regime, but continued to encourage the United States allies Arab League, and Syrian opposition against Assad. For this reason, although United States did not conduct an military operation, Turkey continued to follow to calculate Assad regime will be toppled and United States will be benefit from this situation. Assad usage of chemical weapon in mid of 2013 and crossed the red line of Obama, United States President did not move against him. From that time, actually, it was obvious that United States changed its strategy and will not intervene to Syrian crisis. And more importantly, in August, as we know, Nusra Front declared its affiliation to Al-Qaeda so that the international terrorism became a new threat and a new target for the United States in Syria. And the Assad regime was the secondary target for the United States, and we understand that United States changed its priorities, and actually not only priorities, but changed its strategy in Syria. And as I can claim that Turkey followed bandwagoning for profit strategy until end of 2013. But Turkey could not change its strategy and could not adopt a new circumstances until mid of 2015. When Russia involved to Syria in terms of military and support Assad regime, and it declared that it will continue to support Assad regime, it was an alarm for Turkey to change its strategy and to eliminate the new threats like ISIS and PYD or YPG. As a result, I claim that Turkey adopted a bandwagoning for profit until end of 2013, or we can extend it until maybe Russian involvement to Syria, but this strategy did not work. More interestingly, actually, it was not the first time Turkey adopted this strategy. I think in 1991, when United States launched military operation against Iraq, Özal administration adopted similar strategy with similar expectations. And according to Özal calculations, Bush administration would involve to Iraq and will topple Saddam Hussein regime, and Turkey will benefit too much at the end of this operation. And I think when Syrian crisis began, Turkey adopted a strategy with similar expectations, but we see that this strategy, I mean bandwagoning for profit strategy, did not work for second time for Turkey. And from with the Russian involvement to Syria, Turkey changed not only its priorities, but changed its strategy as well. As we know, the new priorities were the terror groups, the terrorist organizations like ISIS and PYD for Turkey. And I think Turkey shifted its strategy from bandwagoning for profit to threat balancing, but it is another topic to discuss. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all our panelists. Great presentations indeed. We have 13 minutes until the next panel. So we have two questions, both of them for me. I will try to answer them very quickly because of time limitations. Two questions by Furkan Halit Yolcu. What is the effect of the multi-source nature of de-escalation in Syria? Multiple involvement makes it almost impossible to reduce the level of violence, not to mention to end the civil war. As I mentioned, conflict of interest in international politics by international powers especially is very concrete in terms of the future of Syria. The United Nations Security Council's vote proves this disagreement. In addition, supports for different terrorist groups and gaining territories in Syria made the conflict more complicated. And second question of Furkan Halit Yolcu, do you think the Syrian case would be better off if there was only one source of conflict resolution? Great question, thank you. Solely one source in a conflict resolution process would definitely help. However, the success of a conflict resolution process depends on the characteristics of this involvement. Strong coalition is the golden rule, which includes not only supporters, but also other stakeholders who are skeptical about a non-violent political resolution. All sides of the conflict should be included in the process, and third parties should be independent and powerful, and they should be able to put pressure on conflicting parties to sit at the negotiating table. But this pressure does not include them to sign a specific agreement. And finally, international society's support is also vital. And another question for me again from Menderes Kurt, the Project Westphalia for the Middle East gathers experts on early modern German history, politicians and senior administration members from the Middle East, Europe and the US to discuss new ideas and develop creative approaches to conflict resolution in the region. What can we learn from the historical experience of the 30 Years' War? What key elements and instruments could be relevant for the solutions of today's conflicts? What could a regional based settlement look like? And another great question, thank you very much. I wish we had plenty of time to answer or to discuss this question. Yes, this is something like 30 Years' War. Not the same, but similar. States which involved in the civil war aim to re-establish Syria according to their will. But until conflict of interest ends in the Middle East, it is difficult to achieve sustainable peace in the region. What we need is consensus in any type of conflict. What we need is international organizations' proactive role instead of sovereign states. What we need is regional countries' role, a better role, an active role in order to end this type of conflicts. So, do we have any other questions from our panelists to each other before we end the session? You can unmute now if you have any questions. No? No? Then I want to thank to our all panelists again, and I want to also thank to Sakarya University, Ormer, for this great conference. And I'm sure the rest of the conference